High atop a windswept California hillside, overlooking the Pacific Ocean from its perch 5 miles inland, stands a monument to wealth, ambition, and scandal unlike any other in American history. This is Hearst Castle, a place where dreams were built from stone and desire, where the most powerful man in American media created his personal paradise, and where the ghosts of Hollywood's darkest secrets still linger in the shadows of its opulent halls. The story begins not with William Randolph Hearst, but with his father, George Hearst, a man who clawed his way from nothing to everything. In 1865, George purchased 40,000 acres of wild California ranch land along the central coast near the village of San Simeon. He was a mining magnate, a man who understood that beneath the surface of the earth lay fortunes waiting to be claimed. The land was raw, untamed, stretching across hills and valleys with views that seemed to extend forever. George brought his young son William to this place, and together they would camp on a spot they called Camp Hill, sleeping in tents under stars that blazed with impossible brightness. Young William Randolph Hearst was born on April 29, 1863, in San Francisco, the only child of George and Phoebe Hearst. His mother, cultured and refined, recognized that her son needed more than the rough edges of the American West. When William was just 10 years old, Phoebe took him on a grand tour of Europe. They visited castles that had stood for centuries, walked through halls where kings had plotted and queens had schemed. William saw art that made him weep, architecture that took his breath away, treasures that spoke of power and permanence. Something awakened in him during that journey, a hunger that would drive him for the rest of his life. He would recreate that grandeur, that majesty, that sense of eternal magnificence. But he would do it in America on that California hill where he had camped as a boy. First, however, William needed to build an empire. His father owned the San Francisco Examiner, a struggling newspaper acquired as payment for a gambling debt. In 1887, the younger Hearst convinced his father to hand over control of the paper. William was only 24 years old, but he already possessed a vision that would transform American journalism forever. He turned the Examiner into a powerhouse, pioneering a style of reporting that was sensational, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. Some called it yellow journalism. Others called it the future. William Randolph Hearst did not stop with one newspaper. He purchased the New York Journal, then another paper, and another. His empire grew like a living thing, spreading across the country, consuming competitors, shaping public opinion. At the height of his power, Hearst owned more than 24 newspapers. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans received their news from a Hearst publication. He controlled what millions of people thought, what they believed, how they saw the world. Some historians believe Hearst's inflammatory reporting about Spanish actions in Cuba helped push the United States into the Spanish-American War in 1898. When an illustrator sent to Cuba reported that everything was quiet, Hearst allegedly replied with words that would haunt his legacy forever. "You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war." In 1903, Hearst married Millicent Wilson in New York City. She was beautiful, proper, exactly the kind of wife a man of his stature needed. Together they had 5 sons: George, William Randolph Jr., John, and twins Randolph and David. But marriages among the wealthy and powerful are often more about appearance than affection. And as the years passed, something crucial was missing from William Randolph Hearst's life. He had wealth beyond measure. He had influence that extended into every corner of American society. But he did not have the one thing he truly wanted. The year was 1917, when fate walked onto the stage of the Ziegfeld Follies in New York City. She was 19 years old, blonde, radiant, with a smile that could light up Broadway. Her name was Marion Davies, though she had been born Marion Duras in Brooklyn. She came from a family of actors, and at 13 she had already made her stage debut. By the time she joined the Follies, she was considered one of the most promising young talents in New York. Sitting in the front row, night after night for 8 weeks, was William Randolph Hearst. He was 54 years old, married with 5 children, one of the most powerful men in America. And he was obsessed. The other chorus girls warned Marion about him, called him a wolf in sheep's clothing. Marion herself was terrified of the older man, who watched her with such intensity. But Hearst was patient, calculating. He sent gifts. He waited. And finally, he made his move. What happened next would scandalize a nation and create a love story that would last more than 3 decades. But it would also trap Marion Davies in a golden cage from which she could never truly escape. In 1918, Hearst founded Cosmopolitan Pictures, a movie studio created for one purpose: to make Marion Davies a star. He signed her to an exclusive contract at $500 per week, an astronomical sum for a young actress. But the contract came with an unspoken clause. Marion Davies belonged to William Randolph Hearst now, in every way that mattered. Their relationship shocked polite society. Hearst was still married to Millicent, who refused to grant him a divorce despite their increasingly separate lives. Millicent remained in New York with the children, collecting checks, maintaining appearances. Meanwhile, William and Marion lived openly together in California, their affair the worst-kept secret in Hollywood. In that era, such arrangements destroyed reputations, but Hearst owned the newspapers. He controlled the narrative. Anyone who dared write negatively about Marion Davies found themselves facing the full weight of the Hearst media empire. Marion appeared in films at a pace that seems impossible by modern standards. 3 movies a year, every year from 1918 through the 1920s. Many were hits. Theatre owners named her Queen of the Screen in 1924. Critics recognized her gift for comedy, her natural timing, her ability to make audiences laugh until tears ran down their faces. But Hearst had other plans for his beloved. He wanted her to be a serious actress, a dramatic star, someone remembered for grand performances in elaborate period pieces. This was his fatal mistake. Hearst's obsession with controlling Marion's image bordered on pathological. He chose her roles, selected her leading men, often insisting she be paired with actors who were middle-aged or openly gay, anyone who posed no romantic threat. He was protecting what he saw as her virtue, trying desperately to give her the respectability that their scandalous relationship had stolen. In doing so, he may have destroyed her chance at true stardom in the roles where she naturally excelled. But the world only whispers about William and Marion's unusual love affair. What happened in November of 1924 would create a scandal that Hollywood would never forget, a mystery that remains unsolved to this day, and a stain on Hearst Castle that no amount of money or power could ever wash away. Thomas Ince was called the father of the Western. By 1924, he had produced more than 800 films. He was a pioneer who had revolutionized how movies were made, introducing detailed scripts and careful budgets at a time when most directors made things up as they went along. He was brilliant, influential, and by the autumn of 1924, he was also desperate. His studio was struggling financially. He needed a deal, and he needed it soon. William Randolph Hearst offered salvation. The media mogul proposed that Ince produce a film starring Marion Davies, and if all went well, Hearst's Cosmopolitan Productions would lease Ince's sprawling movie lot. It was the kind of arrangement that could save Ince's career to celebrate the pending deal, and Ince's 42nd birthday on November 16th, Hearst invited the producer for a weekend cruise on his yacht, the Oneida. The Oneida was no ordinary boat. It was 280 feet of floating luxury. equipped with the finest food, vintage champagne, illegal bootlegged whiskey, prohibition be damned, and a jazz band to entertain the guests. The passenger list read like a who's who of Hollywood royalty. Marion Davies was there, of course. So was Charlie Chaplin, already one of the most famous men in the world. Actress Eleanor Glynn joined them, along with several young starlets, hoping to make an impression on the powerful men aboard. The yacht left San Pedro on November 15th, bound for San Diego. Ince, delayed by a work obligation, took a train south and boarded the following morning. What happened during the next 48 hours has been debated, analyzed, and argued over for a century. The only certainty is that by Monday morning, November 17th, Thomas Ince was being carried off the yacht, and by Wednesday night he was dead. The official story was straightforward. Ince suffered from a peptic ulcer and had been warned by doctors to avoid certain foods. During the birthday celebration, he drank champagne and ate salted almonds, precisely what he should have avoided. He developed acute indigestion, which triggered a heart attack. Dr. Daniel Goodman, a physician who worked for Hearst, accompanied Ince ashore and onto a train back to Los Angeles. Ince grew worse during the journey. They stopped at Del Mar, where another doctor examined him. Ince made it home to his mansion in Benedict Canyon, and there, on November 19th, with his wife by his side, Thomas Ince died of heart failure. If you're interested in the hidden stories of America's most powerful families and the dark secrets behind their fortunes, make sure to subscribe to our channel. We're uncovering the mysteries that history tried to bury, one mansion at a time. That should have been the end of it. A tragic death, certainly, but natural causes, witnessed by doctors, documented properly. Except nothing about Thomas Ince's death was proper, and the questions began almost immediately. The morning edition of the Los Angeles Times ran a shocking headline: "Movie producer shot on Hearst yacht." The story disappeared within hours, replaced by the official narrative. But that first headline had been seen. People remembered it. Whispers spread through Hollywood like wildfire. The rumors were explosive, scandalous, impossible to believe, and yet they persisted. William Randolph Hearst had shot Thomas Ince. Some said it was deliberate murder. Others claimed it was an accident, that Hearst had been aiming at Charlie Chaplin. The motive was always the same. Hearst, consumed by jealousy over Marion Davies, had discovered her in a compromising position with Chaplin. Some versions had him finding Marion and Charlie in an embrace. Others claimed Hearst simply suspected an affair and used the yacht trip as an opportunity to catch them together. In his rage, according to these stories, Hearst pulled out the revolver he kept for shooting seagulls and fired. But his target was wrong. He killed Thomas Ince instead. Charlie Chaplin's valet, a loyal Japanese man named Toriichi Kono, supposedly saw Ince being carried off the yacht with a bullet hole in his head. A secretary aboard the Oneida claimed she witnessed Ince bleeding. Luella Parsons, a minor gossip columnist who had been aboard the yacht, suddenly found herself promoted to Hollywood's most powerful entertainment reporter with a lifetime contract from Hearst and massive syndication. Ince's widow, some said, had been given a substantial trust fund to keep quiet. The body was cremated with suspicious speed, destroying any evidence of what really happened. The district attorney of San Diego, Chester Kempley, investigated, but his inquiry was curiously incomplete. He called only one witness, Dr. Daniel Goodman, the Hearst employee who had accompanied Ince ashore. Goodman testified that Ince suffered heart problems during the train ride and died of natural causes. The district attorney accepted this explanation and closed the case. There would be no further investigation. The truth, if there ever was a single truth, died with everyone aboard that yacht. Marion Davies maintained for the rest of her life that nothing untoward had occurred, that Ince simply fell ill and died. Charlie Chaplin denied being aboard the yacht at all in his autobiography, though he attended Ince's funeral, a fact that rather contradicted his story. Other guests gave conflicting accounts or refused to speak at all. Even 70 years later, when director Peter Bogdanovich made a film about the incident called The Cat's Meow, the exact sequence of events remains speculation, but whether Hearst was guilty of murder or merely unfortunate timing, the scandal changed him forever. Director D.W. Griffith reportedly said that all you had to do to make Hearst turn white as a ghost was mention Ince's name. There was something there, some wound that never healed, some guilt or fear or terrible knowledge that haunted him. Perhaps this is why, just 5 years before the yacht incident, William Randolph Hearst had begun building his dream. In 1919, following the death of his mother Phoebe, who had inspired his love of European art and architecture, Hearst inherited the family ranch at San Simeon. He summoned the architect Julia Morgan to that hilltop where he had camped as a boy and told her he wanted something a little more comfortable than tents. What emerged over the next 28 years was not comfortable. It was extraordinary. Hearst called it La Cuesta Encantada, the Enchanted Hill. The rest of the world would know it as Hearst Castle. Julia Morgan was the first woman to be licensed as an architect in California, a graduate of the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, at a time when women were barely allowed through its doors. She was brilliant, meticulous, and tireless. Over her career, she designed approximately 700 buildings, but none would be more famous than what she created for William Randolph Hearst. The main structure, Casa Grande, rose like a cathedral above the California landscape. Twin Spanish bell towers reached toward the sky, visible for miles. The building contained 115 rooms, including 38 bedrooms, 41 bathrooms, and 19 sitting rooms. But Casa Grande was only the beginning. 3 guest houses surrounded the main structure: Casa del Mar, Casa del Sol, and Casa del Monte. Hearst called them cottages. The smallest had 10 rooms. The largest had 18. The grounds sprawled across 127 acres of terraced gardens, fountains, and pools. Hearst had gardens for roses, gardens for vegetables, gardens that recreated ancient Roman designs. He built a movie theater where he could preview his newspaper's comic strips and watch the films that Cosmopolitan Pictures produced. He constructed tennis courts, an airfield, even the world's largest private zoo, with animals from every continent. Guests driving up the long road to the castle would suddenly find themselves face to face with zebras, camels, kangaroos, American bison, ostriches, and emus, all wandering freely across the California hills. The Neptune pool alone cost more than some entire estates. Built in the style of an ancient Roman bath, it stretched 104 feet long, filled with water that refracted light to create a brilliant turquoise hue. White marble colonnades surrounded the pool, and at one end, an elaborate temple facade stood like something from a Caesar's palace. The indoor Roman pool was even more spectacular, entirely lined with brilliant blue and gold glass tiles imported from Italy, with 8 statues of Roman gods and goddesses watching over swimmers from their alcoves. But the true treasure of Hearst Castle was not the architecture, or the pools, or even the exotic zoo. It was the art collection that William Randolph Hearst spent a lifetime and a fortune assembling. He was, by any measure, one of the greatest collectors in history, though his methods were often criticized as more accumulation than curation. Hearst bought entire collections at once, purchased antiques by the shipload, acquired more art than 10 museums could properly display. He owned ancient Egyptian artifacts, Greek and Roman antiquities, Renaissance paintings by old masters, elaborate tapestries from medieval castles, historic carved wooden ceilings dating back to the 1400s. He had sculpture, furniture, Persian rugs, Chinese jade, silver from royal houses. Much of this collection found its home at San Simeon, though warehouses on both coasts were filled with items he never unpacked. The main reception room, called the Assembly Room, showcased a 16th century fireplace from a Burgundian chateau. It had been owned by a man named Charles Barney, who had killed himself years before. Everyone called it the Great Barney Mantle. The ceiling came from an Italian palazzo. Next to the fireplace, hidden in the elaborate wood paneling, was a secret door. It opened onto an elevator that connected directly to Hearst's private Gothic study on the 3rd floor, allowing him to appear suddenly among his guests like a magician performing a trick. On the 3rd floor, Hearst's private suite was a wonder unto itself. The Gothic study, where he worked each night, was decorated by Camille Salon, with elaborate painted arches, but the ceiling dated from the early 1400s. 5 centuries of Spanish history looking down on the American newspaper magnate as he previewed the next day's headlines. This was where Hearst exercised his power, where he decided what millions of Americans would read with their morning coffee, where he shaped public opinion and influenced elections, and made or destroyed careers with a word. From the early 1920s until 1947, Hearst Castle was the center of American cultural and political life. To be invited to San Simeon was to have arrived in society. Guests would travel by overnight train from Los Angeles, arriving at the village of San Simeon in the early morning hours. Chauffeurs would collect them for the 90-minute drive up rough dirt roads to the castle. As they climbed higher, the landscape would transform from coastal scrub to Hearst's carefully maintained ranch, and then those exotic animals would appear, as surreal as a fever dream. The guest lists were staggering. Charlie Chaplin came often, despite the scandal that would forever link his name to this place. Cary Grant strolled through the gardens. The Marx Brothers made Marion Davies laugh until she couldn't breathe. Clark Gable swam in the Neptune pool. President Franklin D. Roosevelt visited, as did Winston Churchill, who encountered an Anglophile stockbroker named William Van Antwerp during his stay in September 1929. The wealthy, the powerful, the famous, they all came to worship at the altar Hearst had built. Life at the castle followed Hearst's rigid rules. Guests were limited to 2 cocktails before dinner. Anyone caught drinking in their rooms or on the grounds would find themselves driven back to the train station immediately. Hearst himself rarely drank, and he demanded that others show similar restraint under his roof. Dinners were elaborate affairs in the refectory, a dining hall dominated by 16th century choir stalls and medieval banners hanging from the walls. Hearst sat at the center of the long table, Marion at his side, surrounded by the most interesting and influential people in America. But there were whispers, always whispers. Hearst and Marion were not married. They lived in sin, however beautifully decorated that sin might be. Marion's talent was being wasted in the serious roles Hearst demanded she play, and there was Thomas Ince, forever the ghost at the feast, the dark secret that everyone knew but no one dared speak aloud. Marion stayed with Hearst through everything. In 1937, when the Great Depression finally caught up with even the richest man in America, Hearst's empire teetered on the brink of collapse. He had overextended himself spectacularly, building too much, buying too much, spending as though his wealth would last forever. Marion sold her jewelry and loaned him $1 million when no one else would. She saved him, at least temporarily. By 1941, another scandal arrived in the form of a film. Orson Welles, young and arrogant and brilliant, had made a movie called Citizen Kane. It told the story of Charles Foster Kane, a newspaper magnate who builds a massive estate called Xanadu and lives there with his untalented mistress, a failed opera singer who drinks too much. Everyone immediately recognized William Randolph Hearst, and Marion Davies was devastated by the portrayal of Susan Alexander, the character based on her. The film depicted Susan Alexander as a woman with no ability, pushed into stardom solely by her wealthy patron's influence, a talentless hack who destroyed her own life with alcohol. Marion Davies was many things, but talentless was not one of them. She was a gifted comedic actress who had been successful before she met Hearst and would have been successful without him. But Citizen Kane's damage was done. For decades afterward, people would remember Susan Alexander when they heard Marion's name, and forget that Marion had been genuinely funny, genuinely talented, genuinely successful. Orson Welles would later apologize, saying it was one of his few regrets about the film. He wrote in the foreword to Marion's memoir that she had been one of the most delightful and gifted comedic actresses in cinema history, but the apology came too late. The shadow of Citizen Kane followed Marion Davies until she died. In 1947, William Randolph Hearst's health finally failed. At 84 years old, living in his castle on the isolated hilltop, he could no longer get the medical care he needed. Reluctantly, he left San Simeon for the last time and moved to a mansion in Beverly Hills. Marion went with him. She kept a 3-day vigil by his bedside before the end, never sleeping, never leaving. On August 14, 1951, William Randolph Hearst died. Marion was with him until he slipped into his final coma. The last thing he did before he died was kiss her. Hearst's family, who had never accepted Marion, wanted nothing to do with her after his death. She was shut out, erased from the official story as much as possible. In 1951, just weeks after Hearst died, Marion married an old friend named Horace Brown. It was not a happy marriage. She drank heavily, trying to numb the pain of losing the man she had loved for 34 years. She filed for divorce twice, but withdrew both times. Marion Davies died in 1961, at the age of 64, her career largely forgotten, her love affair reduced to scandal and gossip. But there was one final secret that the Hearst family kept hidden for decades. In 1993, when a woman named Patricia Van Cleve Lake died, her family revealed the truth. Patricia had been raised as Marion Davies' niece, supposedly the daughter of Marion's sister Rose. She was actually Marion Davies, and William Randolph Hearst's child, born in secret in 1919 and hidden from the world her entire life. Marion and William had a daughter together, and they never publicly acknowledged her existence. In 1958, 7 years after Hearst's death, the Hearst Corporation donated the castle to the state of California. A plaque at the entrance reads, "La Cuesta Encantada, presented to the state of California in 1958 by the Hearst Corporation in memory of William Randolph Hearst, who created this enchanted hill, and of his mother, Phoebe Apperson Hearst, who inspired it." Today, Hearst Castle is a museum, a state park, a National Historic Landmark. More than 800,000 visitors tour its halls each year, walking through rooms where presidents once slept, swimming pools where movie stars once lounged, gardens where the most powerful people in America once plotted the course of the nation. They see the Neptune pool, refilled in 2018 after 2 years of restoration, still impossibly beautiful. They see the art collection that rivals any museum in the world. They see the Gothic study where Hearst shaped history. But what they cannot see are the ghosts. They cannot see Thomas Ince, bleeding from a wound that may or may not have existed, carried off a yacht under circumstances that have never been fully explained. They cannot see Marion Davies, trapped in a relationship that gave her everything except the respect she deserved, her talent overshadowed by scandal and Citizen Kane's cruel caricature. They cannot see William Randolph Hearst, aging and ill, clinging to his castle and his mistress and his power as the world changed around him and his empire crumbled. Hearst Castle stands today as a monument to many things. Ambition, certainly. Wealth beyond measure. Artistic vision, perhaps. though some would argue it was merely accumulation on a scale so vast it confused itself with taste. But more than anything, Hearst Castle is a monument to desire, the kind of desire that builds empires and destroys lives, that creates beauty and generates scandal, that lasts for decades and burns itself out in the California sun. The castle was never truly finished. Even after 28 years of construction, even after millions of dollars spent, even after 165 rooms were completed, there were always more plans, more additions, more improvements that Hearst wanted to make. He died before the castle was complete, and perhaps that is fitting, because the dream that drove William Randolph Hearst could never be truly satisfied. He wanted to recreate the grandeur he had seen as a 10-year-old boy in Europe. He wanted to build something that would last forever. He wanted to prove that an American, a self-made American, could create something as magnificent as anything the old world had ever produced. He succeeded in his way. Hearst Castle remains, beautiful and strange and excessive, perched on its hilltop overlooking the Pacific. More than a century after work began, people still come from around the world to see what William Randolph Hearst and Julia Morgan created together. They come to marvel at the pools and the gardens and the art. They come to imagine what it must have been like to be invited to this incredible place in its heyday, to rub shoulders with movie stars and presidents, to live even briefly in such impossible luxury. But they also come for the scandal. They come because they have heard the rumors about Thomas Ince and the yacht and the gunshot that may or may not have been fired. They come because they know about Marion Davies and the love affair that shocked America. They come because there is something irresistible about the dark stories that hide behind beautiful facades, the secrets that whisper in ornate hallways, the ghosts that linger in places where power and wealth and desire collided with spectacular results. In the end, perhaps that is William Randolph Hearst's true legacy. Not the newspapers he controlled, or the policies he influenced, or even the art he collected. But this castle on a hill, this impossible monument to one man's dream and ambition and obsession, complete with all the scandal and darkness and mystery that made the dream possible. It stands there, still, waiting for you to visit, to explore its halls and judge for yourself what kind of man would build such a place, and what price he paid for it. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more hidden histories of America's most powerful families. The past has secrets, and we're here to uncover them all.